Welcome to the 2025 Harvest Press Conference presented by the Napa Valley Grapegrowers and the Napa Valley Vintners. Today, we're going to discuss the 2025 growing season and harvest, exploring the trends, the challenges, and the triumphs that shaped this year's vintage. I'm Jonathan Cristaldi. I'm wine writer, critic, Napa correspondent for Decanter magazine, founder of Cristaldi & Co. and editor-at-large for Tasting Panel and Somm Journal. And I'm thrilled to be here today, and I have a great group of people who are going to give us, they're going to share some wonderful insights, both viticultural and winemaking perspective. So let me introduce the panelists that I have with me today. I've got Ashton Leutner. Ashton, you're the Director of Viticulture for Continuum Estate up on Pritchard Hill. I have Maayan Koschitzky, the Director of Winemaking at Atelier Melka.
Nope.
Hi, Maayan. I've got Nate Weis. Nate is the GM and Senior Winemaker for Beaulieu Vineyard. And we have Megan Gunderson, the Vice President of Winemaking here at Hall. And thank you, by the way, for hosting us.
Of course, our
Glad
pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all, and we're going to talk about the 2025 growing season. We've got a lot to get through. I'm going to share a quick overview of that season, and then we're going to dive right into all kinds of things: heat, rain, you name it. But overall, the 25 season really has it's brought a notable shift in recent years. Cooler conditions overall, spring and early summer rains, and the absence of any major heat events defined much of the year. And I want to talk through a little bit of that, the temperature. We've got some great data. Thank you, Maayan, for sending it my way from the Napa Valley Viticultural Society. I want to talk temperatures real quick. The number of days in 2025 that the temperature reached over 95 degrees Fahrenheit were 8 at most. And on those extreme days, the temperature topped out at about 108 degrees. Now that's really interesting when we compare 2025 to the last 4 or 5 vintages. So if we sort of working backwards, in 2025, if things topped out at 108, in 24 it was very similar. 107 was one of the highest recorded temperatures. In 2023, it was 96 degrees. So a very different, also a cool growing season, but very different. And then 2022 was an outlier. Very hot year because of the heat dome that settled in. And temperatures peaked. We had a recording hit 124 degrees Fahrenheit in St. Helena. So that was pretty extreme. But when we look at the growing degree days, 2025 is really interesting in the sense that it's very close to 2023, 2012, and 2011. And those degree days are basically fall between 2,600 and 2,700 growing degree days. So, okay. That kind of helps set the stage. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. Let's talk about the rain impacts that we experienced. Let's talk about the heat, the yield, the quality. We're going to go through it all. So timing of heat and rain in 2025 was very important. But let's start with a little bit of rain and just talk a little bit about that. I'm going to start with you, Maayan. Talk about how the rainfall from late 2024 into early 2025 influenced early season growth and overall fruit development. Start there.
Yeah, so we're seeing an interesting pattern of the timing, right? We're talking about seasons that are in somewhat similar, but we're seeing a really interesting pattern of the timing of rain and the timing of the heat we're getting. Being a moderate season can be a very interesting way and an interesting season for the maturity, and we can hang the grapes for longer and have a better maturity and flavors. In 2025, we had most of the rains done by March. So by having a much drier spring and getting into the season, we started the cycle earlier, which was pretty similar to 2024. 23, we had much wetter spring, so it was a very different cycle. Getting into the growing season, we had the soils were full. We had a lot of water. We had a great growth, good canopies. It warmed up slowly, so we saw good growth, but it took time for the vines to finish up their growing cycle, fill up the canopies, and we saw a good amount of fruit. We're above average this year, and we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, great, great, great. I'm going to have a question for you, Ashton, but let me set that stage too. So in 2025, bud break occurred around March 21st through April 16th, roughly. Bloom came around May 15th and continued through the 31st. Veraison started kicking in around July 22nd. And harvest kicked off really late August for most varieties, for some red and some white. But let's talk, Ashton, about that early season rain, the winter rains. So, did all that additional soil moisture benefit? Was it a challenge as far as vineyard operations were compared to in recent drier years? Let's talk about that.
You always want to go into the growing season with a full soil profile, and obviously we had that this year, so that was fantastic. The challenges of that are, for us, being herbicide free, getting the weeds under the vine under control, and we had an easier time this year than in the previous year doing so. Because of not having a drier spring. Irrigations started much, later than, let's say, like 2022, for example.
So, okay, so you didn't have to kick in. So the natural growing processes were kicking in just fine because there was good soil moisture.
Good soil moisture.
Rain came later as well, and we should talk about this, but it came sort of at critical times, right? And I want to make a clear distinction here. People are going to talk about the rain that came in 2025, but it's very different from the rains that came in 2011. We'll touch upon that. But for the most part, after this early season, the late season rains, Up Valley was mostly impacted just in terms of the quantity. I noted that Howell Mountain got about half an inch of rain in September. Pritchard Hill, about a third of an inch of rain. St. Helena, Rutherford, similar. So let's talk about that from just a timing perspective. What's important to note about the timing of that rain? Does anybody want to take that?
I think when it came to maturities and harvests, there were a few intermittent storms that came in, and as you sort of noted, they weren't huge.
Yeah.
So really, they were more annoying and slowed us down than anything. We had to wait for things to recover, the ground to dry out a little bit, so we could get tractors in without compaction and things. So there was a lot of stop-start to the season, where we were sort of building momentum with harvest, and then all of a sudden we'd have to stop for a few days and slow down.
Okay, so that's how picking decisions were impacted. Did you experience this as well, Megan, for all your sites?
Mm-hmm.
So
it's just kind of, as Nate described, start, stop, start, stop. So it also kind of helped me, at least with logistics in the winery too, where we would bring in some fruit, ferment, and then we'd have to wait a little bit. And those smaller rain events really don't impact quality. They just slow us down. So it was kind of nice to have a slowed down pace of harvest after a couple of very rushed, more frantic harvests.
Let's talk about the rain increasing powdery mildew, for instance, pressure. How have growers used this as an opportunity to sort of improve canopy management? Let's talk about that. Take advantage of new tools or techniques. So knowing that this could be an issue, talk about that. What kinds of things are you doing from a canopy management perspective?
Sure. Well, I think, and I talked to our grower rep, Katie, this morning, kind of trying to backtrack the season and think about what we did and why that kind of maybe exacerbated the powdery mildew. I think for us, we are tending to leave a little bit more canopy in the fruit zone because of the warmer vintages that we've had. So we had big, robust canopies this year. We maybe left a little bit more coverage. And with the cooler growing season and the higher soil moisture profile, the fog, there was more mildew pressure. And so we use the spore traps. So we have a third-party company that monitors the vineyards and tells us our spore counts. And then you just have to be really on top of your spray intervals, especially in the organically farmed vineyards. It's a shorter spray interval. But it just required more monitoring. But I think we had a lot of success. And that's just what we do in Napa Valley. There's a standard of excellence, and we're on it, and we're after it. And even in those years where there's more pressure, we do a really good job.
So a little bit of rain, no big deal
No big
these
deal.
days.
No.
Just like we could, maybe let's keep it coming. We'll be more Bordeaux-like in the coming years, and we're fine, right? We've got the tools now to handle it. Okay.
It was a really interesting spring and summer from a mildew perspective in that while it was cooler, it's sort of intuitively you want to think that means disease pressure is lower, but we were sort of in this Goldilocks temperature range where mildew was very active, humidities were higher. So it really was, I think everybody's taking this approach of we want to do less, things like spore traps and really understanding what's going on in the field, but 2025 was definitely a season where missing intervals was not an option. You had to stay tight and put out what needed to be put out.
Okay. So I just heard that there was some humidity issues, but I mean overall it was largely, like from a 3,000-foot view, it was a cool growing season.
Yes.
No major heat spikes. And so let's transition from rain and talk a little bit about heat and how this cooling growing season sort of affected ripening, harvest timing. Let's talk about balance, and how you guys dealt, how your teams managed, vine stress and canopy vigor without that heat-driven ripening. So maybe Ashton, this will be a question for you. With a cooler season and these fewer heat spikes, did you guys experience challenges in achieving ideal ripeness, balance? What did you experience throughout this 2025 season?
I would say I really enjoyed this season because the phenolic ripeness was ahead of sugar accumulation. Overall, I think we have really balanced wines coming out for 2025 at a lower alcohol content. For us, trying to achieve this, it was a matter of shorter irrigations. The vines didn't need nearly as much water as they have in previous vintages, as well as stretching the intervals between watering. And then if we saw a little bit of under the vine weed growth, we could leave it there so that it could suck up some moisture too. So
let's talk about the timing of the heat. Timing is critically important, right? So even though it was cool-ish, Maayan, you want to talk a little bit about this?
Sure.
When did heat arrive?
So I think it starts before, but if we go back to pre-veraison, it was compared to 24. It was a very warm July. This year was much cooler July. We came out of veraison in much lower bricks than we usually do. So if you look at the sugar content right after veraison, we're about a brick to two behind, which set the tone to a lower bricks during the maturity season, which again stayed cooler. So we never caught up on sugar development, and we stayed on the lower bricks during the maturity season. So we picked most of our stuff a brick or two lower than usual in a later date, but fully mature and ripe with very good color this year in general, and crazy colors and intensity. I think we all agree on this. Great natural acidity that came from the vineyard with a lower bricks, which is kind of a dream for us.
Is that kind of across the board? Has everybody experienced that?
I think 2025 there were opportunities to make all different styles. Early in the season, there certainly were areas and varieties that were achieving all the ripeness you could desire. And then as you went through the season and things started to slow down, the days got shorter. Certainly it was more a classically styled, moderate alcohol, higher acidity. But I agree, the colors were off the charts, which is always a great indicator of quality.
Color, really intense skin tannin color, or just like color overall from skin to juice ratio. Like talk a little bit about that.
It's interesting. Skin to juice ratio, I think one thing we universally saw was we typically get some sort of dehydration in the field before we harvest. And one of the reasons that yields were pretty strong this year was we never really saw that. There was never that much. So it probably wasn't a skin to juice ratio thing as much as it was that cooler season and phenolic developments on the vine. So the color was just there.
And preservation, color preservation, because I think when it gets really hot and you have that heat exposure, color gets degraded. So we just never saw that. So.
Great. Sounds great. So we're going to have some really dark wines that are all, what, 12.5% alcohol? No. Okay.
Not that low.
It's not
quite that
going to be
low.
like that.
Maayan's been itching for a 1978 repeat of 1978. I know he's excited about that.
But I think we also talk about tannins at the same time. We talk about anthocyanins, but we talk about tannins. And we just had a conversation here that we are seeing a great numbers overall when we measure tannins. We are not, the wines will be in a perfect position to age with good structure, but fairly probably a little softer than the 2024 vintage that, for example, had a higher tannin content in the wine that is a little riper and richer wines, but they're going to have more tannins to support that. And in 2025, we're seeing a little bit lower numbers on tannins, but still in a perfect range of I don't want to say numbers because each one uses different numbers, but in a place that we feel comfortable for ageability and being a very approachable wines at the same time.
Great. Let's use this to talk about to transition to talk about just yields, right? So we're talking about quality. We're talking about the quality of the 2025 growing season grapes. Was 2025's crop heavier than expected? Nate, if so, how much? Was it less than expected?
Well, what we saw, and yields are always very site specific, farming specific. There's, you could talk to 10 different wineries and they'll have 10 different experiences in a given vintage. For us, what we found was whites came in significantly heavy. There was a really good yields in white varieties, for us, especially Sauvignon Blanc. And then reds were more or less at what we had estimated, which were more or less in line with sort of historical. Which was kind of interesting, and again, that we didn't see that loss on the vine that we usually do. So I think a lot of people would report that they got a little bit more than they thought in terms of overall yields.
So fruit set was healthy, good.
It seemed pretty healthy to me, yeah. Nice full clusters for sure.
Okay. I guess that makes me wonder then, how healthy? Did you end up harvesting all of your fruit, 100% of your fruit? Were there areas where you decided to leave fruit on the vine? If so, why? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think it's evident driving around the valley right now that there is a lot of fruit left out there, and that's not region specific. It's sort of everywhere, and the question is, are those things that didn't have a home in the first place and people were playing the spot market game? Is it people being held to contracts, tonnage contracts? Is it stuff that just didn't quite get there? It's probably a mix of all those different things.
Let me set the context for that and come back. And Maayan, I think you wanted to add some, if Megan or Ashton, you want to chime in. But yeah, this particular year, right now as we're doing this conference, it's November. And as you're driving, it's just first week in November, as you're driving into the valley, say from San Francisco, you definitely can see grapes on the vines in Carneros, and you wonder what they're doing. Are they making a great dessert wine? Is there a port involved? We don't know, but it is a thing that's sort of occurred this year. There's a lot of conversation this year about just the sort of economic impacts of people not purchasing as much. Growers who are having trouble finding contracts. So I guess let's address this a little bit. But you said there might have been areas where fruit was left on the vine. But why is this? Maayan, talk a little bit about this. We were talking about this before the conference.
I agree with Nate. I mean, there's many reasons. Some of it was contract related or spot market. I think some of it was that after 23 and 24 vintage that were both heavy. With 2025, some of the producers were just more careful of the tonnage they're going to produce. Created great opportunities. We had, opportunities in vineyards that we couldn't get grapes before. We had a great opportunity to cherry pick what we are picking in the vineyard to improve elevate the quality and making sure that we're maximizing the potential of a site. But yes, in reality, there are some excess grapes in some vineyards that were not sold this year. So we see some of the grapes out there. And I would say for us on the consulting side, we are right on target, but we contracted less. So we were heavy, about 10 to 20% heavy across. Some Sauvignon Blanc for sure, but most of our Cabernets were above what we planned for.
Okay.
Nothing too crazy, but I think that 10 to 20% dehydration that we didn't had this year definitely translated to tonnage.
What about you, Megan? You guys have a lot. I mean, how many acres of vines do you manage roughly?
A lot. Between what we grow ourselves and what we source throughout the valley, we're working in 10 different appellations. And it was a mix, it was a mix of contract maximums. So there was fruit left in the vineyard. There was some of our own fruit that we didn't harvest. There were a couple of vineyards that didn't achieve the proper level of ripeness per the grape contract. So it's just a combination of things. And I think there's always change in the wine industry, right? And so we're just reacting to that change. We're making sure that our inventory levels are appropriate, and we also want to make the very best wine. And so where we harvested and where we didn't was very influenced by quality as well. Napa Valley is known for quality, and we're going to do the best we can in any vintage to make the very best wine.
Do you see this as an opportunity in some ways this year to sort of take a step back and go, okay, well, okay, we've got some vines that we've pulled out. Maybe we won't replant right away. Maybe we'll think about this. Maybe we'll plant corn.
Not corn, but we have 3 of our estate vineyards that are in redevelopment right now. So Sacrochet, our Beller Vineyard on Mount Veeder, and we're looking at redeveloping on Diamond Mountain as well. So it's the time to do that. It's the time for the vineyard, more importantly. It's ready for that. And it's a good time in the industry to do that.
So many reasons, right? I mean, row orientation,
yes.
rootstock, you name it. I mean, you kind of have to. This is the reality of farming. With changing weather conditions from decade to decade. This isn't a problem that you have up on Pritchard Hill. I mean, you're just one estate, right? I mean, did you drop a bunch of your fruit? Did you guys do that?
We didn't. I would say that we were able to be very selective about thinning this year because there, wasn't massive pressure to have, as much as possible. We were able to play around with some crop trials as well. Evaluate quality from a young block better with one cluster a shoot, for example.
Is it?
We'll see in 2 years.
Time will tell. Yes, time will tell.
Yeah.
I think what Megan's referring to is a great indicator of Napa Valley and where we stand. We've seen cycles before where times are tough, and times are tough for everybody. If they're tough for wineries, they're certainly tough for growers. But people like Hall are investing in the future already. Like it's not a let's stop what we're doing. It's a great time to replant and redevelop for 5 years from now. And we'll have a new vineyard that's going to be even better than what was there before. So I love that about the way we're always approaching the future and thinking about improving and leveling up all the time. And I think the reality of the vineyards that have been pulled, it's going to be great for soil health. I think quite a few of them will be fallowed for a couple of years, which will only help organic matter and preparing that land for the future. So I think there's a lot of positives that come out from these relatively difficult times.
Absolutely, and I think people looking forward, or people in the future who are looking back at this recording and the conversation that we were having, this is a moment of time too where the valley is starting to think a little bit more about polyculture farming as opposed to monoculture farming, and that's a really big deal because that's just going to improve the health and biodiversity of everywhere in the valley. So I think it is a really interesting moment, and I would just sort of say, it started kind of around now, and so
it's like the AXR issue in the late 80s, early 90s, where I think anybody that lived through that, it was a very tumultuous time. It was very stressful because vineyards were failing, yet everybody felt as though they came out the other side in a better spot than they were, with better plant material, better row direction, better trellising, all these different things.
It
Right.
feels like we're at the same time with virus pressure that we had in the valley. This is an opportunity for replanting and redevelopment, and we're seeing a lot of the vineyards that there was such a high demand for grapes that they were not pulled out, but now they are pulling the vineyards and preparing the soil in the right way and getting ready for the new planting materials that we have today that are much cleaner. So personally, I think that this is a little bit of blessing in the sky, that we're going to see a much healthier and higher quality grapes in the future. It's just going to take a few years until we're going to come back to full production.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, I think it's a super positive message all around. It makes me think we should talk a little bit about the learning that has taken place. And this is kind of what we're getting at. We're talking about the learning about growing, planting, site. Things are getting so sophisticated. We have such great tools that are being used here in the Valley these days. And we have to deal with, external factors in many vintages like fire and smoke impacts. Let's talk a little bit about the fact that there was a fire in 2025. It was the Picket Fire. It broke out on August 21st. It burned all the way through September 9th, and it burned 6,800 acres. Let's just be clear about this for future generations listening to this, about sort of where and what this fire was about. So again, it was up valley, and for the most part, on the first day that it broke out, there actually wasn't too much of a smoke impact issue. The firefighting community had to create a backburn, and that created a lot more smoke. And what ended up happening was vineyards on the northern slopes of Howell Mountain and parts of Pope Valley were somewhat impacted, but not entirely, not everybody. I spoke to a couple producers up on Howell Mountain who are not making 2025, but there's just a couple, and there are pockets. So let me turn, Megan, we were talking about this before we got going. Talk a little bit about what impacts you've seen, because you have fruit in Pope Valley that you were telling me is unaffected.
Yes, and I'm shocked, because when I saw the fire and monitoring the air quality, we have very good air quality monitoring tools now that we, maybe necessarily didn't have in 2017 or 2020. There have been a lot of advancements, but, the smoke from that fire kind of moved into Pope Valley on the 23rd of August, sat there for a little while, and then moved over into Howell Mountain for a much longer period of time. So what we think we know about fire and smoke is it's your proximity to the fire, it's the quality of the smoke, how fresh is it old, is it new? And for whatever reason, as we started to ferment from one of our very large estate vineyards in Pope Valley, we were not detecting anything. And by the numbers, we don't really have anything either. Maybe very small levels of bound compounds, but nothing that I smell or taste. And then it was kind of a very different story for Howell. So I don't think you can rule out any area when there's a fire. You just have to wait and see. You have to rely on the data on your palate. But it's not necessarily a given that just because something's been exposed to smoke, that it has smoke taint.
Yeah, this is so critical. I really want to drive this point home that smoke impacts, it's a localization issue. I mean, you were not too far up on Pritchard Hill, higher elevation. Sometimes smoke can settle in that area. You guys didn't have any issues.
No, we didn't have any issues.
Right. For whatever reason, airflow was great, during this particular event. But let's just take a second to talk about the technology that we have now to address these issues. So what advances in testing and in technology are helping you guys? Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I think we're all familiar with ETS.
Which stands for?
I don't actually know what ETS stands for.
It's Enological Testing Service.
There you go.
Yeah. Which actually I was told yesterday it started in Marjorie Burns's garage.
Yeah, there's pictures on the website.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. All right,
it's a little different now.
It's a little bit bigger now. So what kinds of, because there's been so much learning since since the early 2000s, 2017, certainly 2020. We can test for more things, more compounds now. Is that correct?
Yes, so ETS has developed their smoke taint panels. We can now measure for free and bound. There's lots of different kinds of smoke taint, different compounds, different levels. And they've worked really hard, along with a lot of other wineries throughout the valley, to establish baselines for different varietals, because some varieties naturally have these compounds present even when they're not exposed to smoke. And then something new that they have this year is you can compare the analysis of your grapes to maximum threshold levels that they've determined. So you run your analysis versus their library, and you have a much more concise picture of whether this fruit is likely to display smoke.
In the bottle afterwards.
In the bottle.
That's what you mean by
Yes.
maximum threshold levels. So if I'm just a consumer and I'm out tasting the wine, there could be a little bit, but the idea that I'm going to detect it, we know where that is at this point. And so, that wonderful smoky charcuterie note that I love, is, who knows? Maybe it was winemaking, maybe it was the grapes. Maybe it was a little residue from something that happened. But we have the ability to test for this and know and to make decisions.
It's a great risk assessment tool. And I think that we all have come to the conclusion that this is probably a part of our future moving forward, hopefully not very often. But I think we as a community are very research driven here in Napa. We want to solve problems. We want to understand what's going on. And so there's been a huge movement since 2017 to really try to figure this out and to do the very best we can with wines that are made in a vintage that's challenged in that way.
Yeah, great. Want to put a button on this. The smoke impacts from the picket fire are very localized, and the chances of you seeing a wine from 2025 on the shelves that was anywhere even remotely near that being impacted are slim to none. Let's just call it none. It's not going to happen. So that's a good thing. Let's move on. Let's just talk about, we've talked about the growing season. We've touched upon the impacts of rain, the impacts of heat. Let's just talk about overall quality. And your early impressions. I would love each of you to tell me your early impressions of 2025 vintage overall. Start with you. What do you think?
Very vibrant, well balanced. I don't think that there's going to be a lot of harsh tannin. This was an interesting vintage in that this is some ideal conditions for extended maceration. So overall beautiful wines.
Okay, very, very pretty. And just talk about that for a minute, because some years you want to do extended maceration, some you don't. What was it about 2025 that you felt it was good for that?
So for us, we saw early phenolic ripeness and the lower catechin number, which is your seed tannin. So if you've got lower seed tannin, you can sit on the skins a little bit longer and not get some of that bitterness on the finish.
Oh.
So.
Okay, nice, Ashton. Okay, Maayan, you got a handful of wines that you're working on. How many different wines do you guys work on? Does it matter? A lot. So what's your? But this is good because it gives you an overall.
I think
what do you
we work with more than 50 different vineyards as well across the valley, so we see a lot. And but I agree. I think this was a year that it was some logistic challenges at the wineries because of tonnage that arrived from the vineyard that was higher than expected, or because of we had a rain and we wanted to pick a little bit more before. It was very much site driven, but some sites we wanted to pick before, some we didn't. But overall, I would say definitely healthy fermentations for us in the cellar. Most of them are very, very healthy. A little bit, I don't want to say easy, but healthy and clean with a great extraction. We saw a very high color extraction early in the fermentation. Being a little softer tannin in general, we're able to do a longer maceration. build nice weight and texture in the wine, while we're also a little bit lower on the alcohol across the board. And yeah, we are about to be done pressing and putting the vintage to bed.
Cool. Nate?
Yeah, we finished pressing today. Actually,
I'm not there yet.
headed back for the party right after this. But yeah, I agree. I'm really excited about the sort of the classic nature of this. I think we have vineyards and fermentations that we worked with from really early in the season, where we're going to have a lot of lushness. That'll be a great part. Most of the wines that we make are blended from across different sites throughout the valley. And then patience was really rewarded as you moved through the season. You know, it's sort of when you encounter these intermittent rain events, it's sort of do I want to go get stuff before the rain, even if I'm not sure it's totally there yet, or should I wait, right? That's always the challenge that you run into. And I think this year patience was rewarded in the sense of let it sit through, let it recover. You're going to have moderate alcohols, you're going to have more acidity, but you put all these pieces together and it's going to work out to be a really nice wine with sort of a much more traditional Napa style than some of the bigger, lusher vintages.
Do you feel like, that just makes me want to ask a follow-up question about sort of skill level of workers, you know, at this point, skill and experience of Napa's farm workers. I mean, is that, you know, we're getting on in years here in Napa. We've learned a lot. Do you feel like that has helped navigate some of these conditions, just sort of making sure that fruit quality is right where it should be, despite little rain events, despite heat events?
I thought for a second you were going to ask me about my skill level, and that's I don't feel qualified to comment on that. It's not as high as it should be for sure, but we have the most skilled labor force in the wine business here in the Napa Valley. I feel very confident in saying that, not only because of who we attract, but also because of the way that the grape growers and the Farm Worker Foundation really invest in them and help them. So yeah, having a skilled workforce like this in a year like this, especially as the rains kept coming and especially as disease pressure grew, it really actually gave you an opportunity to say, okay, so things are starting to happen in the vineyard, some of which we don't want, right? Yep. Some of which we can sort out in the winery, but not all of it. This is what we want to kind of work around as we bring, you know, and we have that trust in the skill level of those workers to say, look, I want you to pick this vineyard block, but here's what I want you to leave on the vine. Right. And they're as invested in the quality as we are, and they feel more than comfortable doing that, which I think it's a huge testament to what we've achieved here in the valley in terms of synergizing the grape growing operations with the winemaking operations.
Yeah, I almost feel like it's a ridiculous question. What do you think of the quality? And we do have a reputation for every year being, oh, everything was fabulous. But in many ways, it is every single year. We have great sunshine. We have, you know, great talented workers, talented winemakers. You know, for folks who come and visit. I mean, the cellars these days are just jammed with like the best technology to make really to deal with anything, and it makes me think a little bit about the 2022 vintage as we're having this conversation, because that was a vintage that was largely panned by a lot of critics. I was not one of them that panned the vintage. I actually thought that those wines were really lovely, a lot of plush, ripe fruit flavors. Yeah, softer tannins, drink me now kind of a vintage. But that's okay. What's wrong with that? That's great. We need that every once in a while because we do have the ability to make really great wines that, you know, have wonderful tannic structures and wonderful natural acid profiles here that age really well. And so you need those drink me now vintages, I think. Megan, I'll ask you then, in the spirit of this conversation, and what do you think of the 2025 growing season and how it's going to turn out in the bottle?
I'm pretty excited about it. You know, I was a little bit nervous at first, you know, with the rain and are things going to get ripe, and are we maybe looking at another 11? But I'm quite pleased with the overall balance. And also, in a cooler vintage, I think that the differences between the different growing regions are much more apparent. You know, you have more time, there's more freshness, And I think it's one of those vintages where you will have really big differences between Howell and Veeder and Diamond, and it's just really lovely and unique and distinctive across the board. So
That's a great point. Really accentuating the characters of
sites.
these different areas. Yeah.
Yeah,
Great
and
point.
there is a lot of character from all of these different areas. That's why we have multiple AVAs, and why in the future we will probably have even more sub AVAs as we figure this all out. Just on the way out here, you mentioned 2011, and I do want to just make sure I touch upon this distinction. I don't want anyone to think that there were tons of rains in 2025 like there were in 2011. 2011, it was early season rain. That kind of came particularly in June, and that just kind of inhibited things, slowed everything down, correct? But really, we're talking about a few minor bursts mid-season, and for the most part, no major issues. We dealt with it. Yeah,
yeah.
Agreed.
I think we driven that point home. Okay. I think we've had a really great conversation. Is there anything that we haven't discussed here? Any of you that you want to communicate just about this 2025 growing season that I haven't asked?
I would just add that I think that Napa as an industry is maturing. I moved here. I consult around the world and traveling, and I think Napa, the impression of Napa wines for many years was we make one style of wine in Napa Valley. And today that we can talk about each vintage and define the vintage by the weather, I think that's we are maturing as an industry, and we're trusting what we have here, and we are creating wines that are showcasing the vintage, we're showcasing the site, and Napa has so much to offer that I think these different vintages that we're experiencing over the last few years, it's actually a great success for us that we can showcase the vintage, taste the wines next to each other, and talk about vintage variation versus good or great. Because the good or great, I think it's a good discussion. Bordeaux has been doing it for many years, but for us here, I think it's not only good and great. It's also about why they are different and why am I collecting these wines and drinking them in a different times. And it's very obvious. 23 is very different than 24, and 25 is going to be very different than all of them.
It's a great point.
Yeah, thank you for making it. I second that. And as somebody who gets to taste hundreds and hundreds of those wines each vintage to sort of give an assessment, it's a challenge sometimes to thread the needle, because there is such variation from producer to producer, from site to site, from up valley to down valley. So there's a lot of options. And I know 2025 is going to be one of those vintages where we're going to see a lot of really interesting wines, a lot of great wines, well-made wines. I think they're going to run that fruit spectrum from red to black to blue. Who knows what we're going to see, but as we're hearing, some great tannin development. So it's exciting. We'll see where it all ends up. But let me thank you all so much for having this conversation with me. Really insightful, really wonderful. And I just want to speak sort of directly to the person looking back on this, and I hope that from a historical perspective, we provided a good snapshot, a good time capsule of how this 2025 growing season panned out. And I just want to thank everybody here, and the Napa Valley Vintners, and the grape growers, and you for tuning in. And we really appreciate it. Thanks so much. We hope you learned a lot, and keep drinking Napa Valley wine. Cheers.
Yes.
Cheers. Cheers.